The return of a ghost. The numbers were supposed to be moving in the opposite direction. For nearly a decade, piracy websites had been fading into history, shadows of a bygone internet. But somewhere in the last few years, the curve bent upward again. Visits to torrent sites climbed. File sharing groups resurfaced. The ghost that streaming had killed was suddenly alive, breathing through the cracks of subscription fatigue. Viewers were paying more than ever, yet somehow getting less. Every month brought another bill, another password, another show disappearing overnight. The very system built to end piracy was now driving it. The question wasn't just why people were returning to old habits, but how the entire industry managed to forget what made streaming revolutionary in the first place. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to when streaming felt like freedom. Section 1. The Golden Age of Streaming. In the beginning, it really did feel like freedom. No cable boxes, no contracts, no waiting for 8 p.m. on a Tuesday to see your favorite show. Just one monthly payment to Netflix, and the whole library was right there. For around $8 to $10, you could watch anything, anytime, without ads or guilt. Back then, this wasn't just about technology, it was about psychology. Piracy had thrived because it was easy, free, and gave people access. The entertainment industry refused to offer on digital terms, but Netflix changed that equation. Suddenly, you didn't need to risk malware or dig through shady sites. You could pay a fair price for convenience. The subscription model met viewers where they were, not where studios wanted them to be. That simplicity cracked the old gatekeeping model. You didn't need cable to see premium content. You didn't need a disc. You didn't even need patience. A single subscription replaced complexity with clarity, and people embraced it instantly. The industry saw the results and followed fast. Hulu offered next-day TV episodes. Amazon bundled streaming with its Prime membership. Disney Plus, when it arrived, packaged nostalgia and franchises into the same promise. One low price for a massive library. The optimism was real. Streaming seemed to fix everything that was broken about entertainment economics. For audiences, it wasn't just cheaper, it felt fair. The moral dilemma around piracy melted away because access was now reasonable. You could still see the same shows in high quality, without the hassle of downloads or pop-ups. Convenience replaced guilt, and it felt like progress. But once the model worked, something else appeared on the horizon. Profit potential that looked limitless. Section 2. The Fragmentation Begins. The warning sign started quietly. Small price increases here, subtle content changes there. But then, almost overnight, the tone shifted. Growth wasn't the goal anymore. Monetization was. Netflix, once the face of viewer-first design, began tightening its grip. The company cracked down on password sharing globally in 2023, forcing users in separate households to pay extra just to stay connected. The previously simple account tiers multiplied, with standard with ads, standard without ads, and premium, each carrying different limitations. The standard plan, once around $8, climbed beyond $15 by the mid-2020s, and the premium tier hit $25. The message was subtle but clear. The age of cheap streaming was over. Meanwhile, Disney Plus, initially launched as an affordable family service, reshaped its promise under pressure from investors. Prices rose, ad-supported plans appeared, and entire shows vanished from the catalog to cut costs. Users realized something unsettling. They weren't truly buying access. They were renting uncertainty. The convenience that sold subscriptions was dissolving, replaced by frustration every time a favorite title disappeared. HBO Max's rebrand to Max in 2023 showed how chaos could become policy. Beloved series, some only months old, were quietly removed to trim taxes or licensing fees. The rebrand confused subscribers and weakened the identity that once symbolized prestige. What had begun as a bold streaming renaissance now looked more like corporate recycling. Other studios took notice. Paramount Plus, Peacock, and a flood of smaller services each demanded their own monthly subscription. A single library splintered into silos. To watch one show from each network, you needed nearly all of them. The simplicity that once justified paying had been replaced by fatigue, and nostalgia for Netflix's one-stop shop began growing again. To put the change in perspective, the early streaming era offered remarkable value, around $8 to $10 per month for unlimited access to a vast library when Netflix first launched its service. Many households replaced expensive cable bundles costing over $100 with just 1 or 2 subscriptions. By the early 2020s, though, most major platforms had raised prices sharply. Netflix's standard plan climbed past $15, Disney Plus past $13, and the average household was paying more than $60 monthly to keep up with multiple apps. The dream of cutting the cord had quietly turned into rebuilding it, one login at a time. Fragmentation wasn't just a financial issue, it was cognitive. Every system required different passwords, payment dates, and recommendation algorithms. Shows jumped from one platform to another mid-season. Consumers began creating spreadsheets just to track where things were. The digital convenience that once felt effortless now demanded project management. Then came the ads. What began as a way to make streaming accessible turned into a revenue layer on top of already higher costs. Subscribers discovered that paying didn't necessarily mean an ad-free experience anymore. The earliest promise, comfort, consistency, and control had eroded into a fractured mess resembling the cable model everyone thought they had escaped. And this fragmentation wasn't accidental. It was the logical outcome of every studio deciding it was safer to build its own ecosystem than to collaborate. Each service hoarded exclusives to attract subscribers, confident their intellectual property alone could hold attention. But as libraries shrank behind competing paywalls, audiences paid more for less content. The business logic made sense on paper. Each company wanted recurring revenue and customer data ownership. But what nobody accounted for was user exhaustion. Loyalty in the streaming economy was built on ease. Destroy that and you destroy the relationship. By 2024, the conversation among consumers shifted from "what should I watch next?" to "what can I cancel this month?" People face subscription creep, the same incremental overbilling that once fueled discontent with cable. Analysts reported churn rates rising across nearly every major platform. Some viewers resisted the change. Others quietly began returning to an old habit. The modern torrent portals were sleek, fast, and even automated. File-sharing communities rebuilt their infrastructure almost invisibly. For those once willing to pay simply to avoid hassle, the math and moral balance had shifted again. If the legitimate path became more confusing and expensive than the old shortcut, the shortcut would start looking reasonable. What began as an industry built on simplicity had turned into one defined by scarcity and upselling. In chasing profit margins, streaming companies recreated the very pain points they'd once promised to erase. The pattern was clear. When the system becomes harder than the shortcut, people take the shortcut again. Section 3. The Return of Piracy. It didn't happen overnight. It began with one frustrated viewer sitting down to watch a show they'd already paid for, only to find it missing. Not behind a different paywall or temporarily unavailable, but gone. The license had expired, the show deleted, and no official platform carried it anymore. After a few minutes of searching, they found it elsewhere, a torrent site. The same kind they hadn't thought about in years. And within seconds, it was playing. No buffering, no extra fee, no login. That isolated moment started repeating itself millions of times. According to global data analytics firms like MUSO and Sandvine, online piracy traffic began climbing steadily after years of decline. From 2019 onward, visits to illegal streaming and torrent sites rose by double digits year over year. The downward curve that once symbolized victory for the entertainment industry had clearly reversed. People weren't returning to piracy out of rebellion. They were doing it out of exhaustion. Each new subscription felt like another tax on their time and income. Content that had once been available everywhere was now fractured, impossible to find without endless sign-ins. The sense of ownership that streaming promised, instant, permanent access, had quietly been replaced by an era of vanishing media. Viewers began talking about it online in blunt terms. If I can't find it legally, I'll find it another way. And the tools had evolved. Modern piracy didn't look like the grainy downloads of the 2000s. Stream-ripping services, Plex-like hosting platforms, and off-the-shelf automation software rebuilt the experience into something seamless. You didn't need tech skills. You only needed impatience. In trying to wall off content, studios had driven innovation in the very behavior they tried to kill. There was also a moral recalibration at play. In the early 2000s, public campaigns painted piracy as theft, robbing artists and damaging creativity. But by the mid-2020s, the narrative felt hollow. Corporations were deleting their own creators' work to save on storage or residual payments. When fans pirated those vanished shows, it wasn't about free entertainment, it was preservation. Communities began archiving lost media, arguing that cultural access mattered more than corporate policy. Even people who never saw themselves as digital activists started sympathizing. The streaming giants had broken their part of the unwritten deal. Pay us, and we'll make it easy. When convenience disappeared, so did moral restraint. The flood of streaming options turned from freedom into fatigue, and fatigue became justification. The quieter story beneath the statistics was simple human psychology. People don't rebel for fun. They rebel when systems stop making sense. Meanwhile, studios battled churn with desperate measures, bundling services, offering discounted annual plans, or launching ad tiers that charged less but interrupted constantly. These attempts barely slowed the drift. As platforms squeezed harder, their core promise eroded further, and piracy simply filled the gap. It didn't need marketing. It only needed frustration. By 2024, piracy was no longer a taboo conversation. It was a symptom of market design. Industry analysts started framing it less as a moral failure and more as a reaction to broken economics. The business model that had beaten piracy in the first place had been undone by its own success story. And that's where the lesson runs deeper than business. It's about what happens when trust meets greed. Section 4. The lesson behind it. Innovation always starts with empathy. Netflix didn't explode because of technology alone. It exploded because it understood the user's pain. Too many restrictions, too many middlemen, too many hoops just to watch a movie. The platform solved that by being simple, affordable, and fair. But over time, the incentive shifted. Once profits became the focus, user experience became a variable, not a priority. That's the cyclic pattern in almost every successful system. The first phase is driven by service. The second is driven by self-interest. What begins as simplicity turns into layers of packaging, upselling, and over-optimization. The cycle ends when users walk away, either to competitors or back to the underground. You can see this pattern beyond streaming. In workplaces, when leadership stops focusing on what makes teams thrive and starts chasing short-term metrics, trust collapses. In personal relationships, when convenience replaces communication, disconnection follows. Systems, whether digital or human, fail the same way. They forget the reason people believed in them. The core lesson is practical. When a system stops serving people and starts exploiting them, people will innovate around it. Not all innovation looks like a product. Sometimes it's a workaround, a rebellion, or a return to older, simpler methods. In this story, piracy is that workaround, a collective decision to bypass a system that lost sight of its purpose. When convenience turns into complexity, loyalty turns into defection. And when the shortcut feels easier than the system, the shortcut wins. That line, when the system becomes harder than the shortcut, people will take the shortcut again, isn't about piracy alone. It's a formula for how trust erodes in any structure built without empathy. The streaming revolution didn't fail because of competition. It failed because it forgot its promise. Conclusion. The Forgotten Promise. Every revolution falls when it stops listening to the people it serves. Streaming was born from a desire to simplify life and empower the viewer. It ended by recreating the same barriers under new logos. The fall of streaming isn't just a business shift. It's a reminder of how fragile progress becomes when greed outweighs purpose. So the real question is, what happens next? Do these companies relearn the value of simplicity? Or does the next innovation rise from their ashes, built again on empathy for the frustrated viewer? Because in the end, the collapse of streaming isn't just about movies. It's about forgetting why people trusted you in the first place. If you found this breakdown valuable, consider subscribing to Rise and Learn. Every story here unpacks how systems rise, fall, and evolve, and what that means for you. Tell me in the comments, what do you think the next streaming revolution will look like? Don't miss the next analysis. Subscribe.